Deep under the ornate, delicate streets of Imperial Vienna lie the equally impressive sewers.
Now we're going down into the sewer, through the kiosk, down the spiral staircase.
Right up to the middle of the 20th century, the sewers were home to many of Vienna's poorest citizens. Thousands of people lived, ate and slept down here, scraping the fat which congealed on the walls and selling it to the city's candle makers. The sewers were abandoned after World War II, but they soon came into use again, inspiring the climax for the 1949 movie, The Third Man. The director thought they were perfect, but he had great difficulty coaxing down his star, Orson Welles.
Orson Welles, he didn't like it down here. He found it very disgusting. It would stink too much, there were too many rats, and he came down here only for about 2 minutes. They had to spray a lot of perfume around to make him calm down.
Hell for some, home to others. Revolting, yet also inspiring. Vienna's sewers are just one example of disgust and our complex relationship to it. We hate it, yet we're drawn to it. We want to experience it, but also reject it. It's the most perplexing, but perhaps the most important of all human emotions. Different things disgust different people. But at the same time, there are some things that nearly everyone finds disgusting. Strange food, vomit, urine, and feces.
This is something, but this is a dog poop. This is a dog poop.
No.
How would you like a little bite of dog poop?
No.
Dr. Val Curtis has conducted disgust questionnaires in Europe, Africa, and India. The same things seem to come up again and again. Here is her list from teenage girls in Lucknow, India.
Feces, urine, toilets, sweat, menstrual blood, vomit, smell of urine, an open wound, saliva, dirty feet, eating with dirty hands, food cooked whilst menstruating, bad breath, smelly person, yellow teeth, dirty feet, eating with dirty hands, nose picking.
But alongside all these similarities, every culture is a little bit different. The Japanese think sea slugs are delicious. Europeans can't stand them. Hindus won't touch beef. Muslims are revolted by pork. But disgust is not just physical. It has a social aspect too. It's part and parcel of class differences, separating the rich from the poor and one race from another. At its most extreme, it's even been used to justify mass persecution and genocide. And disgust is also contrary. Modern art, now more popular than ever, plays with it. It revolts, but allures. It repels, but also fascinates. Despite its disgustingness, disgust is our greatest civilizer. It takes us to the revolting and tells us not to be like that.
I think it's, in a way, the emotion of civilization. To be civilized is to be sensitive to what's offensive and to avoid it.
I think it helps to keep people cooperating, because the threat of disgust is something that people don't want. They don't want other people to think of them as disgusting.
So what is disgust? Why do we feel it? And why does it matter? Is it an instinct, an emotion, or just a word for a whole range of feelings? Are we born with it, or do we each learn a different version depending when and where we grow up? Remarkably, very few people have ever tried to work out what it's all about.
Disgust hasn't been studied very much. It's one of the emotions that has been the least studied. In fact, it's been called the forgotten emotion of psychiatry.
Everyone seems to have chosen to study fear, anger, sadness, and happiness, and leave disgust out.
Literature has long dabbled with disgust, but modern scientific interest is patchy. The first to tackle the subject was Charles Darwin. He wrote a chapter on disgust in 1872 in The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. He classified it as a basic biological emotion alongside love, hate, anger, and fear. Sigmund Freud, however, disagreed. He suggested disgust was socially learned and all about regulating sexual behavior. Then, apart from a few passing references, almost nothing was written for 80 years. But in the 1970s, scientists discovered that all the major human emotions have an accompanying facial expression. All over the world, love, anger, and hate faces are the same. And there is a universal disgust face too. This is now accepted as proof that disgust is one of our primitive emotions. Professor Paul Ekman at the University of California showed that the disgust face is a wrinkled up, closed nose combined with a mouth gape, the precursor to vomiting. The disgust face is a kind of early warning system, alerting others to the presence of something revolting. This universal facial and emotional component of disgust suggests that it's very primitive, something we must all have inherited from our ancestors.
I'll give you a minute from here. I don't know what it is though. I don't want to say it nearer than that.
At the Monell Center for the Chemical Senses in Philadelphia, they're carrying out a multi-million-dollar research program for the US government. Pamela Dalton specializes in creating odors for unusual uses. What the government want is a stink bomb, so powerful it can be used as an alternative to tear gas. They're hoping to take advantage of the unique, predictable way the body reacts when disgusted. But first, Dalton and her team, using themselves as subjects, have to find a universally disgusting smell.
We started screening odors that we thought had some organic or biological origin because we hypothesized that if there were any odorants that stood a chance of being universal repellents, it would be odorants that had some biological significance to many different people.
The smell Pamela Dalton's team pursued was based on rotting vegetables and meat. The main component of decaying smells are sulfur compounds.
We're very sensitive to them. We can smell them in the low parts per billion in air, so it doesn't take very many of them for us to be able to pick up that characteristic odor. And because it disperses widely, they're very volatile, so they're carried through the air. So this means that when you open a container that's been in the back of your refrigerator for 3 or 4 months and you haven't checked it, you open it up and almost immediately you'll get a scent that tells you this is no longer suitable for consumption. You don't even have to bring it very close to your nose.
However, after testing thousands of subjects, the team were disappointed. Southeast Asians were not disgusted by the smell of rotting vegetables and meat.
And when we questioned them about it, many of them told us that it actually smelled quite familiar to them. It was the smell of many of the fermented dishes or fermented sauces or cabbages that they were quite used to eating. While they wouldn't want their homes to smell like that, they didn't find it repellent or disgusting.
However, the team then mixed the sulfur smell with a compound called skatol.
This, I believe, is one of the strongest concentrations of the bathroom odor that we're testing in this particular experiment. So we gave her the full whammy.
It smells like a bathroom after, like, maybe your brother's in there or something. Very bad.
The smell is horrendous. Skatol is one of the main components in the smell of excrement. Combined with the original smell of rot and decay in high concentrations, it's virtually unbearable to all subjects. The record time, even with financial incentive, any subject from any culture has been able to stand it for, is 5 minutes. The difference between disgust and other emotions like fear is very clearly seen in the body's reaction. As the smell enters the hood, Chris's heart rate actually goes down. This is completely opposite to fear, which immediately sends a jolt of adrenaline into the bloodstream and sets the heart racing. In disgust, blood pressure and skin conductance also go down, unlike fear. When disgusted, the body seems to stop and take stock of the situation. If this smell is used as an aerosol bomb for crowd control, the theory is that the people would not panic and run, but move away from the smell slowly. However, because Chris is trapped in the hood, his brain is alarmed at the continuing presence of the harmful smell. Now his heart rate and other signals start to increase, and soon Chris's stomach starts to convulse.
Stomach signals generally range when a person is resting and not feeling nauseated at about 3 cycles per minute. It's a very slow signal. Without doing an analysis on it, but just based on my experience, I would say Chris may be double or triple that rate right now. When people get up to about 9 cycles a minute, they're generally ready to vomit, and they may have very little control over it at that point. So we may want to inquire as to whether he's in good shape right now. Chris, are you feeling all right? We'd prefer to stop subjects before they actually vomit into the mask.
This smell research may be useful for the US government, but it also helps the scientific understanding of disgust. It suggests that it is, at a very deep physiological level, about keeping us away from bodily secretions, in particular excrement, and all sorts of rotting foods. Dr. Val Curtis is an expert on epidemics, with a particular interest in evolutionary psychology. She believes that the evolution of disgust was of huge biological advantage to our ancestors and crucial to our survival. Val is married to an African. Unlike some theorists, she has spent many years in the field. She has seen firsthand an enormous variety of things which cause disgust in different cultures. And for her, a pattern keeps emerging.
There's a certain amount of cultural variation between things that people regard as dirty and things that people regard as clean. But I would contend that the vast majority of things that are seen as dirty everywhere. So, for example, human excreta. There is no society in the world that I know of, that I've ever heard of, where human excreta is anything other than extremely dirty, something which should be avoided. There's no society anywhere in the world that I've ever heard of that does anything but try and get rid of bodily secretions, for example. They try to get rid of mucus from the nose, wax from the ear. I think all of those things are inescapably dirty.
In Val's biological theory, we may have evolved an inbuilt rejection of bodily excretions, certain insects and rodents, and open wounds, because they're carriers of bacteria and viruses with a mission to spread and infect.
The bugs that make us sick, the bugs that give us enteric infections in our intestinal tract, are bugs that get out of one human being and into another. That's how they reproduce. That's how they make a living. They need to get from one person to another, and they're very good at doing that. They're real experts at doing that. So one of the ways they do that, for example, is by provoking diarrhea. And any mother who has a child who's ever had diarrhea, and that's pretty much every mother and every child, will know that diarrheal feces are very liquid and very sticky. And it doesn't take very long for them to cover every single surface in the house. It's almost impossible to contain them. And so this is a strategy that the bugs in our stomach are using to get from one person to another.
Bacteria and viruses spread quickly and can be lethal. We've evolved a strategy of extreme rejection called disgust. But that just plays back into the hands of the bacteria.
Why does meat go rotten? Because there's bacteria or fungus on the meat. It makes a horrible smell when meat goes rotten, and we don't want to eat it. And why should it be that it makes a horrible smell? Well, the horrible smell is to the advantage of the bug on the meat. It means it gets to eat the meat, and we don't want to eat it. So it's one way of spoiling the meat and keeping it to the bacteria itself.
And Val's explanation of the nature of disgust doesn't just stop at the level of bacteria and viruses. She believes we also tend to find certain sorts of intimate contact repulsive too.
We're disgusted if we're forced into too close contact with strangers, people we don't know. They may be breathing viruses and bugs on us. We're disgusted if we see somebody who maybe has bugs in their hair or they haven't groomed themselves very well. So I think we have a very deep tendency, an innate tendency, to avoid sources of infection. The reason being was because having that tendency gave our ancestors an advantage.
But is this really the case? And if so, how conscious is it? In her work, video artist Melanie Marshall has asked people to give her something not normally thought of as disgusting, but not normally asked of strangers either: a kiss.
I wonder whether you might give me a kiss. No, you sure?
No, thank you.
You sure?
So, thank you.
Melanie knows there are many reasons people might not kiss her.
No.
Reasons as much social as biological.
I wondered whether you would like to give me a kiss.
Interesting.
I wondered whether you might give me a kiss.
No, I would feel comfortable actually.
All right, thank you. By inviting someone to give me a kiss in public, and me, who is a total stranger to them, I very much want to see to which extent people are prepared to circumvent their own boundaries, their own physical boundaries.
But to what extent might these boundaries be biologically based?
In the way the project is set up, for them to agree with this request, they have to come very close to me. They have to actually physically move forward towards me and break their own sort of the sort of space around them that they normally assume within a public environment, and enter into a very intimate little bubble. I wonder whether you'd give me a kiss.
A kiss?
Yeah. You can't.
I like you.
Out of the blue.
Why?
No.
Why?
I'll love kisses.
Of all the people around the world Melanie has tried to kiss, only 30% were prepared to enter that intimate bubble. And of those who did, nearly everyone gave her just a quick peck on the cheek. One person in LA even gave her a microbiological reason for refusing.
No, I'm a medical student, and I have mononucleosis is very easy to catch, and all kind of other stuff through kissing. And also, the mouth is the dirtiest part of the body, so no, I won't kiss.
Only one person has ever given Melanie a full-blown, long-lasting, wet one. Was he immune to disgust, or did he just have different values? Val's biological theory may have a lot going for it, but it's only one way of looking at things. There are others who believe that although disgust has something to do with biology, it's got much more to do with culture and upbringing. In today's increasingly multicultural world, there is a huge exchange of culinary tastes. The diets that made one group so different from another are fast disappearing. But extremes of taste are still a source of disgust. We invited this group of international students to try Japanese pig's intestines. Despite being hungry, the idea is hard to stomach.
That is disgusting.
Heart, gizzards, and crunchy raw sea slugs are just some of the things on the menu tonight at this Japanese restaurant.
Different types of sushi.
That's so yours.
This is the sea slug.
Like it's never going to be nice. Are they crunchy?
Pardon?
Are they crunchy? That how beautiful.
Humans are incredibly cautious about what they eat. In Europe, we only consume a handful of mammals, birds, and seafood.
Everybody's got to try it. Come on, everyone's got to have some.
Cats, dogs, rodents, and insects may not be on our menu, but they're safe to eat. If disgust is about avoiding disease, then why do some perfectly edible foods make us feel so disgusted, so close to vomiting?
Do you do with soy sauce? Two soy sauces.
At the end of the day, still, you don't have to still be living on the bottom of the sea for long enough.
Mama. It looks like a cockroach.
That's right.
In the early 20th century, anthropologists brought back tales of cultures which seemed to be utterly different from those in the West. There was a sense that human societies were incredibly varied in beliefs, structure, and laws. It almost seemed that there were no universals. In 1966, a hugely influential book, Purity and Danger, set out to discover the rules for why certain things become dirty or disgusting in different societies. The book was a landmark, and its author is acknowledged as one of the foremost anthropologists of her generation. At the age of 79, Professor Mary Douglas is explaining her life's work on television for the first time. Her theory originated in personal experience.
I don't think I really started it till I was married and trying to live with somebody who had been brought up differently. My husband's half French. And the French, of course I was very embattled against French mother-in-laws and people like this, you see. We had a small flat, and the baby, new baby, Janet, had this tiny room for herself, so she was lucky. And in it was a basin, so I was lucky, you see, taps in a basin. So I used to feed her, and she used to do something in her potty, a few drops in her potty, because in those days children were potty trained very, very young. My husband saw me came in to see the baby, and he saw me emptying the potty down the basin. And he absolutely hit the roof. How can you do that? That's disgusting. He's nearly sick.
Mary Douglas's cultural theory is very different to Val Curtis's biological explanation of disgust. For Mary, nothing is inherently disgusting. It only becomes disgusting because society says so. She developed her ideas when she traveled to Africa in the early 1950s to study the Congolese tribe, the Lele. As a woman, she was forbidden to accompany the men on their hunts.
When they went hunting, I would be in the village at home with my notebook and talking to people who were left behind, and that was the women and the sick, or the children. And so I got a completely different slant. I mean, a man anthropologist would have been out with the men, see, but he wouldn't have been able to talk to the women. These people that I was with, the Lele, they had two words. One is it's forbidden, another one it's dirty or disgusting. They had a very strong word for that. They didn't overlap at all. And I said to the old man who was talking to me, why don't you eat flying squirrels? Because he said, oh, well, I don't know, it's disgusting. How nice of it. So I said, why? You eat squirrels. You eat birds. Why not flying squirrels? He said, yes, but is it a bird? Or is it an animal? So he was saying, we like to know what a thing is and where it belongs before we eat it, which really I thought was the greatest clue, and that's where I got my main idea from.
Douglas's idea is that societies classify everything in order to make sense of the world around them. People, animals, and even behaviors. The things that become disgusting are the things that transgress or somehow blur categories. In India, eating with the left hand is disgusting, and eating with the right hand is polite. In Europe, people don't use hands at all. It's not that either hand is revolting per se, it's just that each culture has different categories for how hands should be used. In Mary Douglas's words, dirt is matter out of place.
Every group of people make their world together and cut it up in different ways. They carve up nature in different joints. They don't take notice of whatever you might call the real joints in nature, so they've got their own classification system.
In Mary Douglas's theory, disgust is not about avoiding disease. For her, there is no universally dirty substance. Things only become disgusting because they violate a certain society's categories. This theory accounts very well for the huge array of differences between societies. But in addition to Mary's cultural and Val's biological approaches to disgust, there is a psychological one.
Watch where you're going, careful.
Across the Atlantic at the Ivy League University of Pennsylvania is a man who's devoted the last 20 years to studying it.
And here is what I love most, garbage.
Paul Rosin, professor of psychology, has specifically tried to apply Mary Douglas's ideas to his research.
Oh, there it is. And in addition to the gunk, the blood and the guts and all that, you've got sort of what looks like decay. So you've got a big dose of disgust here. It's not wet, but it looks wet.
Is wet better?
Yeah, wet's better. Slimy. Slimy's best.
Why would slimy be best?
That's a good question. Body substances tend to be slimy. That's one reason, I suppose. And Mary Douglas would say, with probably some merit, and that slimy things are sort of intercategories. She sort of feels we're unhappy with things that don't fit neatly into categories. And solid, liquid are two categories, and slimy is sort of in between. She would also probably say, probably has said, that one reason feces is upsetting is it is an ambiguous substance. Is it part of the body? Is it part of the world? And of course, our interaction with it is it as it parts the body and goes to the world. So it's a sort of another something of it's an intercategory. That's the argument that she would use, I believe, also for why you, when you spit in a glass, you can't drink the glass, even though the spit was just in your mouth. Because when the spit leaves your mouth, it's now a funny thing. It's an inside substance found outside. Who's got an extra pencil?
Yeah. I got me.
What happened to mine is that I just changed shirts for this performance. Now you might think this is the shirt I would have taken off to put something else on, but that shows you how crazy you are.
Rosin believes, like Mary Douglas, that disgust is largely learned from culture. He was the first person to devise questionnaires and experiments which quantify disgust. Using his students, he shows in the lab how, in Douglas's words, things have to fit. Chocolate is not meant to look like excrement. Sweet biscuits and savory ketchup are from different categories. Bedpans are not meant to be drunk from.
Okay, it's not used.
No. And I'm going to take some apple juice. You might guess why I'm using apple juice here. And I'm going to pour it in there. And I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to pick that up and drink some apple juice from it.
No, I don't really want to.
And
Well, yeah.
But Rosin believes that although disgust is learned, it is primarily connected to a concern with contamination. He seems to accept Val Curtis's theory that at its core, disgust has some biological component. In this experiment, he lets the subject know that the cockroach is sterilized and germ-free.
dip him or her, I don't really know the gender of this cockroach, in there. And now our question is, how would you like to drink that juice?
No, thank you.
You sure?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Well, one feature of disgust that we use as a definition of disgust is that disgusting things are contaminated. That is, if they touch a otherwise acceptable thing, they render it inedible.
Rosin thinks that disgust starts with a primary concern with food, then extends outwards. We first learn to be disgusted by, say, cockroaches. Then we learn all disgusting things can contaminate and pollute us. Then we project those contamination fears onto people, personalities, and even onto historical events.
This is a real Nazi cat. They want to touch it?
No.
Okay, and just tell me again what's putting you off.
The idea that a Nazi wore this and was possibly killing people when he wore it.
Because the reaction is really, get this away. It starts out as, get this out of my mouth. You know, this is offensive. To, get this out of my life, out of my soul. It's more extended, so then moral things become part of it. Here we go. There it is. You want that. So what's the feeling you get from it?
Disgust. Kind of repulsion.
What's the
It
problem?
was actually worn, touched their body, like, directly. I don't know.
Okay.
In Rosin's theory, the moral and cultural aspects of disgust are clearly learned. And while he accepts that biology may play a part in forming disgust, he thinks its role is limited. For him, Val Curtis's biological theory is far too extreme. Rosin thinks virtually all aspects of human disgust are learned by copying parents and the culture around us. That's because in the lab, he believes he has shown that babies are born with no sense of disgust at all. Disgust doesn't seem to exist in animals to anything like the extent it does in humans. To have a human sense of disgust is to understand the boundaries between healthy behavior and the revolting and depraved. Human disgust is complex, and it seems we have to learn it from scratch.
Why do we have to toilet train kids? Why is it so much difficulty? Now remember, it's not obvious to a lot of people, but one reason we toilet train early is that children like feces and they will play with it, and one reason we have diapers is that to keep them from getting access to their feces. So we're offended as socialized adults by all of this stuff that kids do, and we go through a rather elaborate process to get them to stop liking this. Basically, we take something they like and we make it to something offensive. It's an amazing transformation, and a fair amount of cultural work is done to do that.
Research conducted by Rosin in the last few years has shown that babies are not born with disgust. Rather, they possess a very simple reflex he calls distaste, a reaction to bad taste. Rosin has tried this test with over 50 substances, and it only seems to work with bitter, sharp tastes like lemon. In a 3-day-old child, the lips purse up and the nose wrinkles. A reaction this early in life has to be inborn. Rosin believes distaste is disgust's junior cousin. Distaste is like the simple bad food avoidance mechanism which all animals have. For Rosin, it is distaste that is inborn and which culture takes and builds into the uniquely human emotion of disgust.
Disgust itself is learned. Core disgust is learned. That is, there's nothing offensive about worms biologically, and we don't show any reaction to them. Children eat them. Children eat feces. Animals eat all these things. And this is all a cultural sensitivity built on distaste, built on this built-in response to unpleasant taste. So you see in the child, in the infant, the newborn, that's a bitter taste in his or her mouth, that she makes this face to it. And that's the core of it. That's the biological part.
As Rosin's experiments with children show, full-blown disgust takes a couple of years and a lot of input from parents and society for it to start to emerge.
Okay.
Kids under 2 will eat just about anything. Imitation dog poo, dog biscuits, and even cockroaches.
Can you eat a bug? Yeah?
Okay, is it good?
Yeah?
It looks like a dog poop, doesn't it? But you know, it's really chocolate. It's made of yummy fudge. Would you try some?
As they approach 4, kids start to realize certain things are not to be eaten. They're suspicious, but not disgusted.
Ah, yum. Good.
But they still don't realize that a bug is potentially contaminating.
Okay. Now, would you have some more apple juice? Okay, good. Good. Is that good? How about a little of that?
No, thank you.
Spoon and we can give you a...
But by 8, they react just like adults. The disgust emotion is now powerful and irreversible.
Why not?
Rosin's work with children seems to confirm his theory that disgust is built on distaste and learned by copying adults and older children.
You sure it's not okay?
However, the biological aspect of disgust may be bigger than Rosin believes. New evidence from MRI brain scan work in the UK is forcing us to re-examine how biology and behavior interact. Dr. Mary Phillips analysed the brain activity of subjects when shown a variety of pictures, some disgusting. Traditional theories would have led her to expect a very generalised pattern for disgust, a whole mixture of memories, ideas and reflexes. But to her surprise, disgust was confined to a very specific and very old area of the brain.
Well, when I first did a study at the Institute of Psychiatry in London looking at the normal brain response to disgust, it was thought that the normal brain response to any emotion would be the same. So whether we felt fear or disgust or sadness, the brain response to emotion per se would involve the same bits. But I showed that in disgust there was a very specific pattern of response, so very specific areas of the brain seemed to be involved in our response to disgust.
Phillips found that the actual area of the brain which processes disgust is an area of the temporal lobes, a deep old part called the insula. This area is, in evolutionary terms, younger than the fear area, the amygdala, but much older than rational thought, which is located at the front of the brain. If disgust is a general learned response to culture, then why should it have this particular location? And how could it be so old? Mary Phillips' work suggests disgust evolved before culture. She then decided to extend her study to people who have extreme reactions to dirt and pollution. Patients with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. The disease takes two forms. One is an obsessive checking of things, like doors being closed or the gas being off. The other is an obsessive concern with washing. Many patients won't go outside or even shake hands for fear of contamination. Sandra Scott is one such person. Just like the notorious millionaire Howard Hughes, she has become a virtual recluse because of her obsessive fear of germs. She wouldn't let the film crew into the house. Only one person with a handheld camera. Her terror of contamination governs her life. It's most clearly seen when she makes a cup of tea. After washing her hands, she starts by filling and emptying the kettle many times.
Why do you empty the kettle?
Make sure that the water's clean and that the kettle's clean and there's no old stale water.
How often would you normally fill and empty it?
At the moment, 14 times.
If you like, our insula is always triggered by disgusting things like body products, waste products, etc. That happens to us all. That's a normal disgust response. But in the washing of people, the people with washing contamination worries, their insula is being activated inappropriately when it shouldn't be, by things which are not particularly pleasant to look at, but certainly we wouldn't classify as disgusting. So it's almost as if the threshold for activation of the insula has become too low. The insula is too sensitive.
So you wash your hands again there?
Yeah, because I'm going up to get the cup to bring it down to wash it out.
Find it stressful?
Yeah, excessively. It's tiring as well. And I know that if I get to the end and it doesn't look right, if something's wrong, then I have to start all over again. So I might do it 3 times before I think that it looks all right so that I can drink it.
You're washing your hands again?
Yeah, because I'm going to go and get tea bag and sugar.
Right.
Sandra's disgust receptors in the brain do seem to be turned way up. She goes to extraordinary ritualized lengths to keep her sense of contamination in abeyance. The fact that the brain seems to have a particular area for processing disgust, and that if it goes wrong, it can affect our behavior, seems to argue for an organic, predetermined component to disgust.
I think a lot of recent psychological experiments have shown that we have predisposition to learn certain things, that our minds aren't just a blank slate which can learn absolutely anything, but we have a series of modules which are there for solving particular problems, and those are the particular problems that our ancestors faced in the evolutionary path, in the path in which we evolved. So it's been shown, for example, in experiments, that you can condition a disgust for feces, you can condition a fear of snakes, but you can't condition disgust for flowers. You can't condition disgust for oranges or sweets. Much as I would like to be able to condition my children to be disgusted by sweets, it's not something you can do. So disgust is there as a predisposition, waiting to be learned.
Quite how much biology predetermines our behavior is not clear, but even Paul Rosin admits it's significant.
If it were the case that broccoli was the bad thing in our culture, and we wanted to make broccoli offensive instead of feces, it might turn out that it would be easier to make feces and broccoli. It might have some predisposition to develop likings and dislikings for certain substances. The link to the body might be helpful.
The definition of disgust as a built-in biological predisposition makes strong evolutionary sense. It's not created from scratch, but pre-exists, ready to be molded by the culture around us. We evolved a system which stopped us putting bacteria and viruses in our body. But as humans became more wide-ranging in the past, so did disgust. It became a powerful radar which protects us from the dangers, real or imagined, in a wide range of environments. Disgust is something which evolved and increased our chances of survival. Perhaps it's no surprise then that the greatest disgust elicitor of all is death.
Death is always something very much associated with disgust, not only in food, the decayed food, but the dead bodies and all this sort of thing.
Ultimately, we're going to rot. So a large amount of the work that we do as human beings in staying alive is defeating these bugs that are trying to eat us up, that are trying to kill us. And basically, we die when we lose that battle.
But having a system in our brains which sees all sorts of substances and people as potential sources of infection can be something of a liability. Disgust may be the emotion that stops us giving ourselves diseases, but it also can make us highly suspicious of outsiders and susceptible, if the conditions are right, of demeaning and even destroying them. As we shall see next week, disgust has not just shaped our behavior, it has shaped our whole history.
That next programme is next Sunday at 1:45, and if you'd like to be disgusted further, go to channel4.com/culture. Well, next on 4, a preview of the forthcoming Argentinian stage in the World Rally Championships.